Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Springs Mental Health Summit, a summit for parents, teachers, neighbors, and friends to talk about mental health in our community. For more information, go to springsummit.org. Here's your host, Trever Sharon.
We're so grateful that you have joined us this morning on Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. Dr. Mayfield and I are joined by Aaron Short, a fully licensed therapist here at Mayfield Counseling Centers.
That's notable. Fully licensed.
Fully
therapist.
licensed.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's 2,000 hours over 2 years of counseling.
Wow, I feel really special right now, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You should just sit with that for a minute, you know.
And Aaron is on today to talk with us a little bit about his heart for human trafficking victims and a world that I think oftentimes we ignore or neglect or are just not aware of what's happening in the world with human trafficking.
And one thing we want to do real quick is if you have kids in the car with you and that kind of stuff, you know, that are, what, I don't know, 12 or under or something like that.
Tween and below.
Yeah, might want to wait to listen to this podcast until you get home and can do it in your office or you're by yourself, because it's going to be talking about some things that I think the general population, right? I mean, really doesn't fully understand that is going on in our community and in the world. And, you know, little ears probably shouldn't be hearing that right now.
Sure. Yeah, that's been my experiences when I share with people. They don't realize or just aren't aware of how severe and how prevalent human trafficking is in the world.
So Aaron, tell our listeners real quick, just this idea of human trafficking. I mean, I think we can, you know, ascertain what that is by the name, but I think it's much more than just what that name signifies.
Sure. Actually, let me read off a few stats just to get the data accurate so people actually understand what we're talking about here. So human trafficking is the purchase of a human for either labor or sex. So the average cost, across the entire world on average is $90 to purchase a human. According to some estimates, 80% of trafficking involves sexual exploitation and 19% involves labor. So I think people that bring in under false pretenses women to work as maids in a home but don't pay them, take their passports, things like that. That would be the labor exploitation. There's 20 to 30 million slaves in the world today. There's actually more slaves now than during the height of, historical slavery, as we learn about it in textbooks and whatnot. According to the State Department, which puts out the Trafficking in Persons report every year, Google that if you want to read in depth. There's 600 to 800,000 people trafficked across international borders every year, of which 80% are female and half are children. The average age that a teen is trafficked in the U.S. is 12 to 14 years. Think about when you were 12 to 14 years old. Many victims are runaway girls who were sexually abused as children. Historically, that is the story. California has 3 of the FBI's 13 highest child sex trafficking areas: LA, San Diego, and San Francisco. Between 14 and 17,000 people are trafficked in the U.S. every year. It's the 3rd largest criminal industry in the world, generating $32 billion every year. 15 billion of that is in industrialized countries, so don't think that this is just third world nation. This is first world nation. And women and girls obviously represent the largest share in forced labor and sex trafficking victims across the entire world.
That slavery statistic just blew me away. I mean, I knew that we had a lot of slaves over in the world, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about any of this. I mean,
right.
To be honest.
And why don't we talk about it? It's obviously a prevalent thing in our society, but so why isn't it talked about or known? If it's the 3rd biggest criminal activity, why aren't we hearing about it?
I think that there was a perception, perhaps. I mean, I can even think within my lifetime that women that were prostitutes were quote-unquote working as prostitutes, that it was as if they were choosing that life and that was what they were doing. I think that culturally, we're obviously an over-sexualized culture with, extreme ideas of what is okay in that regard. And so I think that recognizing that prostitution and the purchase of humans for the use of sex is something that's occurring and that is, in fact, not their choice is just relatively a new understanding.
Would you, I mean, and this might be stepping into something that we can do another podcast with later, but would you say pornography is a part of that prostitution piece of it with the trafficking, or is that, do you have any statistics or understanding around the use of pornography?
Sure. I mean, I don't have stats off the top of my head in that regard, but if pornography, as we all know, dehumanizes the people that you are watching in pornography, and there, as a result, creates this concept of humans as objects, then how much easier would it be for somebody to take that next step of, I'm going to purchase this object for my pleasure, not just I'm going to watch this movie for my pleasure. So I think that's a huge part of it.
I think before we get any further, I want our listeners to understand, why is this such a big deal for you personally? Like, why out of everything that you could get involved in or, be passionate about, why have you and your wife really chosen the human trafficking side of things to make your, I mean, if I can be honest, I mean, it sounds like your life passion and your call.
Yeah. I'd have to say that, I was in the U.S. Coast Guard for 6 years, and I got out. I was working for the FBI for 3 years. And it was during that time it became very obvious I shouldn't work for the FBI, that it wasn't the right fit for me. So I was praying and asking, what am I supposed to be doing? And I received this project while I was working there. I worked in kind of records and research for them. And as I was doing this project, the entire project was on human trafficking. And every day, I felt that, that small voice in me saying, like, this is your fight. This is what you need to be doing. And it wasn't, sitting there digesting data and generating reports for higher ups to read so that they could make decisions. It was being involved in the restoration of those people that were just, terribly abused and dehumanized and just hurt beyond anything that I think, any of us sitting here can even imagine. So that was the beginning. I became a counselor to have the tools to be able to deal with trauma. And that's primarily what I do here at Mayfield is trauma now. But prior to me working here at Mayfield, my wife and I went on kind of a 3-month self-funded missionary trip over in Thailand, just working with kind of a slew of different anti-human trafficking organizations that were there. By the way, Google Ezekiel Rain and go donate to them because they're awesome and they're doing good work in northern Thailand and Chiang Rai. But that just sort of cemented, my understanding that this was my fight and that I needed to, find out a way to be involved in it and make a difference, and that's why I'm passionate about it.
Making a difference is not always as easy as it sounds, and I think through the years of hearing about human trafficking from friends that have a passion for the victims of human trafficking, it's always seemed like one of those many issues that I am unable to fix, obviously, because I'm just one guy. But what would you say to the person who's listening who does want to do something, doesn't just want to sit by and hear this and move on to the next thing and ignore it? What can we do to help either the victims or to save people from this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm actually glad that you asked it, because the people that are unfortunately already in it need our support, need our help, and that can look like 1,000 different things. If you're in Colorado Springs, Google Human Trafficking Task Force of Southern Colorado and go to their meetings, get involved that way. There are representatives from everybody from the FBI to local grassroots organizations that are in the fight, that you can become either a volunteer or donate time, donate money, donate resources. And if you're listening to this outside of Colorado Springs, your city has something like that. Like it's not hard to find. It's especially if you're located near an interstate, you're near a human trafficking pipeline. It's a guarantee. And if you're near that pipeline, law enforcement's aware of it, and there's a way to be involved. So make some calls, Google, find what you need to find, but it's easy to be involved in that regard. To help people not fall victim to it, there's kind of an easy word picture if you think about somebody standing in the center of a room, and they have concentric circles drawn around them. And those circles represent the protection that exists within their lives. So the first circle might be parents, the second circle might be a coach, the third circle might be friends, the fourth circle might be teachers, the fifth circle might be anything. The people that don't have enough circles around them fall victim. And obviously there's exceptions to that. I'm not saying that's an absolute rule, but that's a pretty common reality, that the less protection somebody has, the less involvement in community somebody has, the more likely that a predator sees them. Pimps are predators.
Right.
Think about predators in the wild. There's a wolf that sees a weak creature, and it goes after them because they're weak. Community makes people not weak. Community makes people protected. Community makes the difference.
Well, I think to add on to that question is, we see these things on Facebook or social media where it says, watch this video and, pick out what you notice. And it's, it's a human trafficking awareness video. And then they go back and circle, a kid that's, chained but sweeping, or, these kinds of things. How do we, maybe if we can't get involved in a task force, or we can't get involved in, how do we educate ourselves so that we can just be an everyday good citizen? We see something at a Target. I mean, I know there's a Target here in town that somebody noticed a gentleman, not calling him a gentleman, and can't say the word I'm thinking on on the air right now, but that was following, particularly moms in carts that had a kid that was in a car seat and then a toddler that was running around, and followed them through the Target and attempted to take one with a running car out back. And a Good Samaritan noticed that and called the police, and the police were, waiting just around the corner. And, so how do we become that educated, aware, I guess maybe, spatially, socially aware person?
Yeah. I think that, as far as things to look for, just tips about the reality of human trafficking, there's an organization in Denver called the Polaris Project. I think it's polarisproject.org. Don't quote me on that. But if you visit their site, they have a lot of different data that you can educate yourself on in regard to human trafficking. But I think we all know when something doesn't look right. Like, I think for the most part, a lot of us have a gut feeling like there's something kind of weird in this situation, but we make a choice to ignore it. And
the bystander syndrome.
Yeah. So somebody else will deal with it. Somebody else will make the call. Oh, she's probably fine. I'm not too worried about it. Like, you are that somebody else. Like, if something's weird, why not go up and engage that mom in conversation so she's got support, and just say, that guy was acting kind of strange. Do you mind, I'm not trying to freak you out or anything, but is it okay if I, just walk, next to you until you get into your car? Just try to be, non-intrusive, but why not be helpful? Why not be the person that prevents something terrible from happening?
Well, I mean, for an example, I was driving by a truck stop the other day, and there was this U-Haul truck, or U-Haul type truck, and the back was open, and then there was a mattress in the back, and it just didn't sit right. And so I didn't think, I moved on, but then I drove home that night, and it was still there. And so I ended up calling Highway Patrol and just saying, hey, I don't know if this is anything, it doesn't feel right. How you don't real often see a non-marked U-Haul type truck with a mattress in the back. And it wasn't, it was parked so you couldn't really see it, but it caught my attention. And I don't know, they're not going to call me back and inform me of anything, but it was just, it didn't feel right, the situation, but it felt right to make a phone call. And, the state patrol was like, thank you for the report, and we'll look into it. So just something as simple as that, right? I mean, it just...
Yeah, there's an old quote that I'm going to butcher and that I can't give the credit to because I can't remember who said it, but It is along the lines of the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Actually, I think you did a pretty good job with that quote.
I think you got it right.
All right. You got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Was that Churchill?
I think it's Churchill. Yeah.
Yeah.
But say that again.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And women for this, obviously.
Yeah.
Right, but I think we get in our minds, I'm too busy, I don't want to do this. Somebody else will take care of it. And I think, if somebody wants to Google the bystander syndrome, bystander syndrome, it's an interesting study that we look at in psychology of major things happening in cities or towns or,
high schools,
car accident, you drive by a car accident, somebody else has got that. Well, make sure. My wife drove by an accident the other day and it looked like it just happened, and she called and she was actually thanked by the dispatch going, you're the first person to call. Thank you for doing that. It's just that, how much more time does it take? 10 minutes maybe?
Well, especially with our phones nowadays, just about everybody has a phone and can take the 2 minutes to make a call if they see something, and I think that you can take that a step further and use your phone to get connected with some of these human trafficking prevention and rescuing organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the fear, you watch a YouTube channel or something like that, but the generations, the millennials, maybe the zennials, I'm not even sure what we call them, the newest generation, but the bystander is syndrome is such a big deal where somebody's having a school fight and everybody's got their phones out. I don't want to trigger anybody that's listening, but the Florida shooting, the school shooting, I was talking to our connection with Safe to Tell, and she said that nobody called the police. Everybody had their phones out filming it as he was coming in and shooting. And it's like, wait a second. And I think that's pretty applicable to a lot of these situations. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of work that we could do as a community that we don't, because we just stand by, or maybe we're too worried about how somebody will respond to something. It's better to have somebody angry at you than have a kid get taken, or a woman get taken, or a boy get taken. Mm-hmm. Just, let them be angry at you. You tried to help.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the one thing that seems impossible, but it would make human trafficking go away tomorrow, is the demand.
Right? So speak to that a little bit.
Well, let's think about the reality that human trafficking is a terrible business, right? And a business exists to fulfill a demand. So if the demand was gone, the business would no longer exist. When you think about the demand that this is, primarily men buying sex, where do you think that is rooted in? Where do you think the source of that all of a sudden being okay to men, not all of a sudden, but being okay to men, where do we think that is seated?
I'd wager that it's probably somewhere in the porn industry, and we could probably go deeper than that too.
Yeah, I would even go before that, because why does the porn industry even exist?
Desire to be seen, known, valued, and loved. And if we don't get that through whether neglect, trauma, abuse, it comes core. The core is really right. It's to be valued, seen, and loved.
Yeah. And obviously, the men are making these choices, and I'm not trying to justify anything, but the reality that uninitiated men that don't know who they are, have zero confidence in relationship, have turned to porn in order to try and feel like they're anything, or that they have what it takes, or that they're accepted, and therefore see women as objects, are the guys that are buying women for sex. So, if those men were initiated, and they felt like they knew who they were, they had confidence in their masculinity, I think theoretically there could be a way to end the demand.
So this, I mean, now we went real deep, right? I mean, this goes beyond just an individual issue. Now it becomes a societal issue where community and relationship become the most important thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the isolation that I think men feel, and the inability that they have to ask for help, or ask for mentorship, or ask for clarity on who they are, who they could become, I think just perpetuates a masculinity that in effect becomes a monster. And these men become monsters. Is there an option for them to change? Absolutely. And there's awesome stories about that, even to the point of, pimps that were deeply involved in human trafficking becoming liberators and, fighting to end trafficking in their countries. But that's not the norm, but it is a possibility. And I see the responsibility of fathers. I see the responsibility of mothers and grandfathers and friends and teachers to help young men at least step through these stages of initiation, like knowing that they're cared for and loved, being allowed to test their strength and see what they're capable of, being directed towards causes that they can fight for, being taught that their hearts are good and that they can engage.
Well, I think one big deal that I hear a lot of, and that really makes something rise up inside of me, is when you hear somebody say, well, boys will be boys. That's what boys do. They're always thinking about sex. They're always thinking about this kind of stuff. And it's not valuing and validating, the way we were created. We're, created as sexual beings, and that, in and of itself is not bad, but it's this idea that we have a society that perpetuates, I heard something the other day about a young man that raped somebody in California, and there was a commentator that said, well, boys will be boys. And it's like, no. Like, we have to fundamentally change our narrative on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
For any of this kind of stuff to change too.
Yeah, the culture needs to come around, and instead of blaming the victim, which really doesn't do anything, be able to put responsibility where it needs to be. And I think our society has a hard time putting responsibility where it belongs anyways, in any situation.
Yeah.
There's a lot, we play the blame game really, really well, and we play the defer game much better. And I can absolutely see, if we were able to put responsibility for our own actions on ourselves, which is such a novel idea, how that could change the way that we perceive things. But I hear what you're saying too, Aaron, that this is an issue that's deeply rooted in our humanness, and we probably won't see human trafficking go away because the root is taken out.
So
One can dream.
One can dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and one can continue to fight.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of this really cool story from John Eldridge, actually. I think it was maybe in one of his podcasts, but he was talking about, Morgan Snyder was talking about how he had observed one of John's sons when they were younger, in effect being cruel to his younger brother. And he was like, and then, the son was called out, and Morgan was like, oh, you're going to get, thinking you're going to get in trouble now, and just kind of waiting for that to pass. But instead, John brought his son to him and said, you were, in effect, you were made to be strong, not to hurt people, but to be a protector. Mm-hmm. And to have that identity spoken into your life at a young age like that, I think can make a huge difference.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, we appreciate you being on the podcast, and I think from a practical standpoint, are there any takeaways? I'm not going to say give us 5 takeaways, because then you have to come up with 5 things. But are there some important takeaways that somebody that's deeply passionate about this that you would tell our listeners? Here's some things I want you to mull over and think about in the days after this, listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't reiterate the sources I've already named, but I will say, who in your circle can you bring closer? If you're a guy or a girl, who can you be a protector of? And that doesn't mean you have to walk them to school every day, but maybe that's having a weekly coffee date with somebody that you know has a hard time at home, or noticing a kid that isn't quite as connected in school, inviting him to engage in something after school or eating lunch with them. Like, what can you do to be a deeper and stronger part of your community?
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate you having me on today.
We will see you next week. Thank you for listening.
And if you've got questions, candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, and we can direct those to Aaron.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/candid conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.